So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Steve Wu, Insights Director with Ipsos's Affluent Intelligence team. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Welcome, everybody. We have quite a bit of information for you today. The insights that we'll present are derived from two sources. The first, an in-depth recontact survey we conduct every October as part of our quarterly barometer studies. And second, our ongoing Ipsos Affluent study using fresh data from our spring 2022 release. This will be available on April 26th to our valued customers. Our agenda today, the topics we will cover are the role of sports in the lives of affluent consumers, a breakdown of their fandom by different types of sports, and the profile and makeup of specific sports fans. We'll also dive into the sports collectibles market and look into the phenomenon of NFTs, as well as the impact of sports betting into markets such as New York. Finally, we'll discuss the role of sports and how it fits into society and politics. So let's get started. Let's talk first about how sports fit into the lives of affluents. We know that the majority of affluents consider themselves to be sports fans. Going a little deeper, nearly half of them say that sports play a big role in their lives. And about 2 in 5 affluents often go to sporting events. According to the Consumer Expenditure Survey, affluent Americans spend $20 billion annually on admission fees to sporting events, sports equipment, souvenirs, and other sports-related expenses. A lot of money goes into sports by the way of affluence. 25 million affluents have actually attended a sporting event in the past year. We know that affluents make up roughly 20% of the US population, but they account for 60% of all sporting ticket costs. This is not the amount of tickets, but rather the money they spend on tickets. So those buying courtside seats, lounge boxes, season tickets, etc., will factor into this. This number is astonishing and shows the value of affluent consumers in the sports world. And when they do attend games, in-arena advertisements provide a great opportunity for marketers. We see that 27% of affluents have seen a sporting event in the past 6 months. And among that 27%, the vast majority of them have shown interest and are engaged in these ads that they see in these events. However, unsurprisingly, we see a drop-off in sports attendance in nearly half, from 60% down to 32% because of the pandemic. In the early stages of the pandemic, many sports leagues delayed their seasons and then eventually playing games without crowds or placing limits on attendance. I know in New York, they finally opened up to the fans. They placed a limit of 10% of capacity at first. And fans have also shied away from going to sporting events for safety concerns. But we could expect this number to rise as limitations in attendance are gone and the threat of coronavirus has simmered down a little bit. And we know sports will always remain a vital part of an affluent's life. On a personal level, they actually played more sports or exercises during the pandemic more than pre-pandemic levels. So if you look at sports, such as basketball, football, some of these outdoor sports, they have all increased during the pandemic. And where do they get their sporting news? So TV remains the top media source used. The younger generations of affluents, the Gen Zs and the millennials, they use Twitter to get their sports sources, twice as much as total affluents, 33% versus 17%. Gen Xs prefer cable TV, while the older generations, the boomers and seniors, they still prefer the traditional media, the broadcast TVs and the newspapers to get their sports sources. And using an open-ended question about their sports source, we see that ESPN and Google tops the list of responses as their go-to sports source. Some other media brands mentioned are Twitter, CBS, NBC, some of these traditional TV networks. If you squint hard enough between ESPN and Google, you'll see that we have a few mentions of husband in there as well. And just for fun, we also ask which sports pundit are their favorites and which one do they love to hate. So Tony Romo, Bob Costas, Charles Barkley comes up as favorites, as you'll see on the left-hand side, while people love to hate Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless, Joe Buck. So personally, I could say that I agree with most of these responses, but let us know what you think. And now I'll pass it over to Jesse. He'll go over a deep dive into different types of sports that the affluents are fans of. So Jesse, take it away.
All right, you want to move on? We started our survey by asking people on a 1 to 10 scale how passionate they are as a sports fan. The people who said 0 are non-fans, and this will be my last mention of those people today. People who gave a score of 1 to 5 were considering casual fans. These are people who watch big events. They're not really kind of day-to-day involved in caring about sports teams. The people who said 6 to 8, we consider moderate fans. These aren't necessarily people who aren't passionate about sports, but they may be only passionate about 1 or 2 sports in a way that a hardcore fan who gave a 9 or 10 live for sports every day. If you want to move on. So we asked what they're fans of. We asked over 40 sports on college and professional levels. This is the top 10. The NFL and the Olympics are the most popular, with more than half of affluent sports fans being fans of those. Baseball, NCAA football, NBA, men's basketball. Nothing really stands out. These are your major sports in the U.S. Most people are the average number of sports that people are fans of is about 5.7. We'll move on. So this is the fans of sports by the level of fandom. Obviously, the hardcore fans are going to be the biggest fans of all the sports, with moderate fans generally tacking pretty close. As you can see on the NFL and the Olympics and baseball, they're a lot closer than the casual fans are. The casual fans really do like the Olympics, as well as MLB and football, but they're less interested in the college level and the smaller sports. Interestingly, the casual fans are slightly more likely to be tennis fans than the moderate fans. And as you can see, the hardcore fans are the fans of 8.5 sports. The moderate fans are fans of 6.5 sports, and the casual fans are only fans of about 3 sports. If you want to move on, the more passionate fan is, the more likely they're going to see it as an important activity. What we're basically seeing here is that sports are ingrained in the lives of the hardcore fans. It's important bonding time for their family, in a way that it's still could be for moderate and casual fans, but at much lower levels for them. Only about 1/3 of the affluent sports fans will watch events when they already know the outcome. So this is something that affects like the Olympics, when they're on in the time zone of China or Australia or Japan in recent years. About 45% of hardcore fans and 43% of moderate fans are still willing to watch games after they know the outcome. This is what we're kind of getting at with the moderate fans are still very passionate about their sports. It's that they may not be interested in watching a random game that they haven't seen, but if they have their team, they're still willing to watch after the fact. If you want to go on. So let's look at some gender splits on these. Men are about 2/3 of the fans for most sports. Women are more likely to be fans of women's sports. And we've added in the women's sports that we asked about into this slide so you can see it a little better. Women tend to be fans of fewer sports than men, and women's sports are generally less popular than their male counterparts. So the majority of women's soccer and WNBA fans are women, which isn't going to come as much of a surprise. But for women's college basketball, there are more men who are fans. And this college works a little differently, which we'll get to later. But basically, people who are fans of their college come into play more than whether or not they're a fan of the actual sport generally. The other thing to notice here is that with the Olympics, it's basically 50-50 male and female split. If you'd like to move on. So generationally, the younger generations and older generations look pretty different in their sports fandom. The MLB, NBA, soccer, and golf are where we really see the biggest differences. And it also, what we kind of gather from this is it's also related to the demographic differences that we see with younger affluents are more ethnically diverse than the older affluents, which tend to be whiter. So that comes into play with baseball and with the NBA and the men's soccer. The younger generations that are more diverse are more likely to be fans of. Golf, older generations are much bigger fans of it. And the only one that Gen X, which does make up the bulk of affluence right now, is in the lead for is the NHL and tennis. Steve, diving into the racial differences, African American affluents are big fans of a lot of sports. They outpace everyone on the NFL, the Olympics, MLB, which I gotta say was a little unexpected to see, but it's happening. Basketball for both pro and college, and tennis slightly. The Hispanic affluents are most likely to be soccer fans. And as you can see with the average number of sports, the African American affluent sports fan population is just more spread out across different sports than any other group. Do you want to go? All right. And then we looked at it kind of on a, levels of affluence. Wealthier affluents are more likely to be fans of college football, the NHL, soccer, and golf. These are traditionally a little more affluent-based sports. But the difference in the number of sports that they're fans of is fairly insignificant. And it was a little interesting to see that the less affluent are bigger fans of tennis. You want to move on? All right. Now, as we saw earlier, we fielded this survey last October after the Summer Olympics had aired, but before the winter. Based on what we've seen in other things, we kind of expect this plan to watch number to actually have increased over the viewing. But you can see it's about even for Summer and Winter Olympics. The most popular sports won't come as much of a surprise. Swimming, gymnastics, and figure skating are all huge fan favorites. Ski jumping kind of jumped out at me, for lack of a better word. It's exciting. What we do notice is that the opening ceremonies are extremely popular, but nobody really cares about the closing ceremonies in the same way, which was kind of funny. If you want to move on. So we wanted to see where these kind of overlapped with fandom. Obviously, the most popular sports are going to have the most overlap. So the NFL, the Olympics, and NCAA football are going to be broadly popular across the fans of other sports. If we remember back a few slides, when I said the college fan base looks a little different, 92% of women's college basketball fans are also men's college basketball fans, but that's not really going the other way. You're only about 14% of men's college basketball fans working with also being fans of women's sports. We're also seeing that 89% of college basketball fans are also fans of college football. And the other way, that goes to about 60%. What we're really seeing here is that fandom is kind of sports specific, but the college is different than how professional sports work. About half of college sports fans are fans of the teams that they're fans of because they or someone else they know went to that school. If you want to move on. So let's look at the fan bases of these sports. For some context, affluents generally are about 51% male. The average age is about 45.7. They make 188,000 in median income. They have about 950,000 in net worth, and it's about 73% non-Hispanic white population. The NFL is the most popular sport among affluents. It's heavily male, but this is actually one of the least male-dominated fan bases. Age is about average, income is around average, net worth is a little below average, but it's right there. There's a big Northeast skew, and the favorite teams that we got when we asked this were the Patriots, the Bucks, the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. So that comes into play with the Northeast skew. Also, the Patriots have been good for 20 years. Tom Brady just left and went to the Bucks, and they've won the Super Bowl. And the Giants, Cowboys, and Eagles are all historic franchises that people love. If you want to move on. The baseball, it's a little different from football. It's about 52% of affluent sports fans, 63% male, which is the same as the NFL. It's a little bit older than the average population. The income and net worth are both around average, a little higher for the net worth. The regions skew south and west more, which was interesting. And it's a little bit whiter than the affluent population as a whole, with the favorite teams, Yankees, Red Sox, Cubs, Braves, and Dodgers should come as no surprise to most people who are fans of these sports. There's a lot of Yankee and Red Sox fans. With the Cubs and I think St. Louis Cardinals were the sixth team on this. Historically, they were the farthest west teams. So they used to have a big fan base in the West, and that's kind of held up for generations after. Braves won the World Series last year, and the Dodgers have been good for the past few years too. If you want to move on, Steve. The NBA, this is going to start looking different. It's much more male. It's the youngest of the four major sports with baseball, football, and hockey. Income is around the average, but the net worth is the lowest of the major sports, and that kind of has to do with it being a younger base of fans. They just wouldn't have accumulated the wealth yet, but that's not to say that it's not coming for them. It's the least white fan base. It has a heavy Northeast skew again. And the teams are, we're seeing the Celtics, so we're getting One thing you have to remember with teams, especially for this northeastern teams, everything from about half of Connecticut up north is going to be a Boston fan. The Golden State Warriors have been good for the past 10 years. The Lakers are a huge historic franchise. The Suns were in the finals last year, and the Sixers have been good for the past couple of years. If you want to go to the next one, let's look at the hockey fans. We're getting back to the normal, 63, 64% for the male-female split here. The average age is right on the average affluent age. Income is higher and net worth is a little below the affluent population, but it's not that much. There is a heavy Northeast and a surprisingly Western skew for NHL fans. It is the whitest fan base in all the professional sports, which doesn't come as much of a surprise. And with the teams, the Bruins, Rangers, and Blackhawks are all members of the original 6 NHL teams. The Capitals are a little newer, and the Las Vegas Knights are in their 5th season. So it was interesting to see that pop up as highly as it did, but they were in the Stanley Cup Finals their first year, and I think they've kept that going. If you want to move on to the next one. Soccer fans. This is only about 25% of affluent sports fans. It's heavily male than the 4 major sports. It's younger than the 4 major sports. There's a higher income and net worth than the 4 major sports in their fandom. It's less white and more Hispanic than any of the sports. And there's a heavy Northeast skew. We asked an open-ended question about what teams are fans of, because we'd have to list out for each league, which will cover the whole world, who they're fans of. For the most part, we were seeing, U.S. Men's and women's national teams, but you can also see things like Manchester United, Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain, as well as some other international teams. There are MLS teams getting in there. I see DC United, but it's a very diverse fan base because soccer isn't historically a U.S.-based sport that people pay attention to here. So it's growing, but we're seeing some interesting stuff with that. And if you want to move on, the profile of golf fans, it's coming off Masters weekend. It's 72% male, so it's more male than the 4 major sports. It's the oldest of the major sports that we covered. They have the highest income, and their net worth is above and beyond what any of the other sports have. It's about 150% of the total affluent population for the median net worth. It is a heavily white fan base, and there's a Northeast skew, but it's also over on the South as well. So if you want to move on, Steve, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Let's take a little break from data-related sports and let's concentrate on the sports collectibles market. So a perfect storm occurred starting in 2020 that jump-started the once stagnated sports card market. Kobe Bryant sadly passed away in January of 2020. That led to a huge demand in his rookie cards and autographs. Then in March, we all know, COVID lockdown hit. People found themselves isolated at home, too much time on their hands. They started cleaning out their attic. Nostalgia might have hit. Then the thought of making extra money with their newly found free time enters their head. And a month and a half later, The Last Dance, a 10-episode miniseries premiered on ESPN. And this chronicled the last year of the Bulls dynasty run with Michael Jordan, and it caused a dramatic surge in demand for his cards. A quick example of this surge. In pre-pandemic, the prized 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan rookie card in gem mint PSA 10 condition. For those who collect sports cards on this webinar, should know what I'm talking about. This typically sold on a range of about $18,000 to $30,000 on online auctions. As recently as July 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, that same card, a PSA 10 gem mint condition, sold at auction for $840,000. So think about the price difference, $30,000 to $840,000. This is the surge that we're all talking about and experiencing. In fact, in 2020, at the end of 2020, eBay sports card sales increased nearly 2.5 times compared to 2019. And in the first half of 2021 shows even higher numbers than 2020. Football cards have tripled. Hockey and basketball cards have also seen triple-digit growth. So a huge opportunity in the sports collectibles market, especially when it comes to sports cards. And what happened recently? Fanatics, a sports memorabilia company, shocked the sports card market by acquiring exclusive license to produce baseball cards from MLB. This is a license that has been around with Topps for the past 20 years or so. Then a couple of weeks later, they actually won the rights to NBA and NFL card licenses as well. And this all goes into effect 2026 and all the way through to 2045. So a 20-year license that they have exclusive. And in January of this year, Fanatics altogether just bought Topps outright for $500 million. So that is to say, the sports card market will be going through a lot of changes in the near future as Fanatics explore other areas of business, such as sports betting, NFTs, which we'll dive into a little later, and other plans to acquire big sports companies such as Panini and Upper Deck. So let's talk a little bit about affluent and sports collectibles. We see that 1 in 5, or 21% of affluents are collectors of some sort. And the most popular one is sports memorabilia at 74%, and a little less so for figurines and sports cards in there. And the numbers you see on the right are among the collectors, among the 21% that we see. So memorabilia remains the top items that they do collect. And looking at these profile of these collectors, they all skew male. Memorabilia and figurine collectors are typically younger, about half of them falling within the Gen Z and millennial age range, while card collectors are evenly split among generations. You'll see that 33% are Gen Z millennials, 35% are Gen X, and even 32% are boomers and seniors. So a lot of these people that grew up on the 1970s, 1980s sports cards, they're the collectors. So it's a great opportunity, especially for the sports card market, to kind of attract the younger audiences. So how do we attract young audience to a market? We offer them something new with the promise of riches, of course. So currently there is a small but very rapidly growing rate of sports NFTs. So what is an NFT? A quick definition of NFT is, it stands for a non-fungible token. It is a form of certificate of authenticity stored on a blockchain. So think of it as a digital collection that you officially own and can sell or trade. So NFTs can be used to represent items such as sports cards, digital sports cards. Could be photos, could be videos, could be audio, or any type of digital files. And NFT hasn't reached mainstream, but it's growing at a rapid pace, with predictions of 200% by the end of this year. Sports NFTs itself is estimated to generate $2 billion by the end of 2022. This is an attractive market for those who have missed out on a cryptocurrency adoption in its early stages. And a little example of how much the sports NFT actually sold for. You'll see on the left, a statue of LeBron. This is actually a photograph, a digital photograph of LeBron James, sold for $21.6 million. And this they put on as a one-to-one collection, meaning it's only one of them that you officially own. Obviously, anybody could download the photo, but you don't officially own it. And I think that's more of the bragging right, the right to resell it. There's only one of these available. And if you look in the middle, the sports NFTs have actually gone into gaming as well. So there's a right to actually buy a Brett Gardner character in a blockchain-based baseball game, and the right to kind of play this unique character costs $21.3 million. So a lot of money being thrown into sports NFTs, and I would assume the majority or all of them of these higher price sports NFTs are done by affluents. So how does affluents actually fall into the NFT? We see that currently 7% of affluents have purchased NFT. 3% of affluents have purchased a sports NFT. And among those who have purchased a sports NFT, the 3%, we know that 77% of them have purchased for investment purposes. So unlike sports card collections in the past, where you do as a hobby or the need to complete a set, most of the NFT collecting is done for future profits. So you could ridicule people spending $21 million on a sports NFT and not understand why, but maybe in the future they could sell it for $30 million for a profit. And speaking of profits, let's talk a little bit about sports betting. So sports gambling has always been around in the past. About 1 in 5, 20% of affluents have played fantasy sports. With the majority of the fantasy sports being NFL, 75% of them, a little bit of NBA, a little bit of MLB. About 1 in 7, 15% of affluents participated in sports pools such as March Madness brackets, Super Bowl boxes, etc. But in May of 2018, a landmark event happened. The Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting, opening the door for states to allow sports betting if they wish to. So they started rolling out sports betting on a state-by-state basis. And currently, the majority of states, 31 or 32, including Washington, D.C., now have some form of legalized sports gambling, whether it is in person at a casino or online sports books such as FanDuel, DraftKings, and Caesars, which you may have seen commercials for. So 9 additional states could possibly legalize later this year, with Ohio being next. So about 40 out of the 50 states should have some form of sports betting by the end of this year. There are about 10 states that do not expect it to be legalized in the near future, and these include some of the powerhouse states like Florida, California, and Texas. So just a little background of what states are legalized and what's not. Now we'll jump into New York State and the impact of New York State's sports betting. So New York State legalized sports gambling in the beginning of this year, January 8th. This provided a huge boom of tax revenue for the state. This comes from sports books and the customers having to pay taxes on their winnings. So it's a win-win for the state of New York. Let's say you as a bettor, if you were to place a bet and win, you have to pay taxes on your winnings eventually. But if you lose, the sports book gets all your money. So the sports book has revenue from your money and they have to pay taxes. So it's a win-win for the state. They'll get tax revenue regardless. And New York is now the highest earning state in US in terms of sports tax revenue. New Jersey was the previous high, but a lot of that is because the New Yorkers who couldn't previously sports bet, they traveled over to Jersey, crossed the bridge, and started placing bets in New Jersey. So the governor of New York estimated that sports betting will bring in $250 million in 2022. But as of the end of March, New York has already generated $150 million of that estimate. With baseball season just starting, NFL and college football season still to come, and as Jesse mentioned earlier, those are the more popular sports. Expect New York to shatter that $250 million revenue estimate. And let's tie in affluents and sports fans, and let's tie in affluent sports fans to sports gambling. We see that 7% of affluent sports fans have gambled on sports. But this number, the 7%, is actually before when New York became legalized. So expect this number to rise as more states legalize online sports books. And sports gamblers come from all walks of life. In fact, non-affluents actually have a slightly higher rate of gambling than do affluents. They have a 10% rate versus the 7%. But as we know, affluents have the spending power. and that's likely to carry over to higher wages and risk reward when it comes to gambling. So they would be the one that contribute more to the revenue streams in each state. And breaking out a little bit of the makeup and the profile of these affluent bettors, we see that they're primarily male, similar to the profile that Jesse went through, and spread across all generations, and even the older generations getting into the act. And you see boomers and seniors, 21% of them. The sports gambler profile consists of 21% of boomers and seniors. And as I mentioned earlier, the most popular sports affluents gambled on is football, followed by basketball and baseball. So this is something to keep track of, especially in the latter part of the year when football and basketball seasons are on at the same time, and not to mention the MLB playoffs in October. And I'll turn it back to Jesse to talk about the intersection of sports and society today. So Jesse.
All right. All right. So we looked at these kinds of statements in a number of ways, but what popped out to us was the political breakdown. These first two statements, politics should be left out of sports and athletes should feel free to talk about their political views. Given the political views being expressed by athletes the past few years and where, these questions kind of come out of, I don't think these are especially surprising, given that the topics of race and police shootings and stuff have come up, that you'd see Democrats more willing to say that politics can be part of sports and athletes should talk about their views. With the team owners' political politics affecting how they feel about their team, Democrats are more likely to have this affect them, probably because most team owners are Republicans and heavy Republican donors as well. If you want to move on, this is one of my favorite questions that I've ever seen. Sports stadiums should be publicly funded. Only 9% of affluents said that they agree with that. This is one of the smallest agreement numbers I've ever seen in my years of marketing research. It was interesting that the Democrats are 3 times as likely to be on board with that, but it's still below 20%. On the right, you'll see a mock-up of the new Buffalo Bills stadium that New York has generously agreed to pay somewhere around $600 to $800 million for. But nobody is really a fan of this. So it's I just kind of find that very funny. And it's, there is a lot of that middle, neither agree nor disagree, but still it's more than half of affluents disagree with this. So if you want to go to the next one. These ones we looked at on the age skews. That's where we really saw the stories with them. It's these get into the generational divides. The younger affluents are more likely to believe that the NCAA allowing athletes to earn money off of their name and likeness is a good thing. They're younger, they're going to feel that the athletes should be able to make their money versus having a traditional view, but it's not that big a difference. Older affluents are much more likely to believe that only vaccinated athletes should be allowed to play in their sports, which was interesting with the news being that vaccination or COVID affects younger people less. You'd expect that the younger people would be less willing to go along with that. And esports are not sports. The younger affluents believe they're sports. The older generations, the Gen X and the boomers and seniors, are not fans of it. I doubt many of them know what they are, but it is a big event. It's growing, and it's coming for the sporting basis. If you want to go to the next one. We also looked at a couple more kind of athlete-centric questions and came away thinking that the higher earning affluents are more able to give a little leeway to athletes who may need some space. On the top, you'll see Naomi Osaka, who last year at the French Open basically said she didn't want to do press conferences anymore because it affected her mental health. On the right, you'll see if an athlete is accused or convicted of domestic violence, I can't root for them anymore. The more affluent population is a little bit more willing to cut their ties with the athletes, but it's 2/3 of the population that are saying that they're not willing to root for those players anymore, which is interesting to see. So if you want to go to the next one. So to kind of wrap up what this all means, sports are a major role in the lives of affluents. They go to the games, they watch them, they listen to them, they're following them online through their apps. It's just a part of their life. And that's not just the hardcore fans, that's still the moderate and even the casual fans of sports. 6 in 7 affluents are fans of sports. 16% are hardcore fans. They're following 6 different sports on average. We are seeing a lot of demographically driven data here. Older affluents are likely to be fans of the NFL and MLB and golf, while younger affluents prefer the NBA and soccer. Ethnicity plays a factor in that. We can see that that's happening, and whether or not it's the ethnicity or the age, we're noticing that the sports that the younger affluents are fans of are different from the ones that the older affluents are. While the fans are typically male, we're still seeing a lot of female sports fans, and half of our population shouldn't be ignored from the sporting community. And then the collectibles and gambling markets are huge. With New York recently legalizing, several states are on the verge of it. Gambling is going to be a big thing in sports going forward, and there's very little chance of going back from that now. Sports cards NFT adoption saw a big boom in the pandemic, and affluents are fans of their sports and they want to buy stuff and they want to show it off to their friends, and we're going to keep seeing that. So that kind of wraps us up, but I think we got a couple questions in. Let's see what we got. For the profiles, do you see any unique demographic skews compared to the general market profiles? We do. Especially with the more niche sports, you're going to see those. We kind of dove into the major ones here because those are the ones that are bigger and are going to have a big fan base, so it's easier to look at them. But the women's sports have a very different makeup than the men's sports. The college sports are going to be more educated fan bases because you have because so many people base that on personal connections to the schools, and then things like when we looked at esports, which was very small, but it is all younger people, and a lot of them have a lot of money. So it's a growing event for people, and we're going to see that continue growing going forward. But I think that wraps us up. We'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we're going to be making the recording of this available to you. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I just want to step in and thank Steve and Jesse for today's really interesting data and presentation. And thank you all for joining us. Remember, we did make available a handout in the console, so go ahead and download that at any time. And of course, at any time, do reach out and connect with us directly. That now concludes today's Ipsos webinar. Have a wonderful day.